When most people think about surviving a freezing winter night, they picture a roaring fire, blankets, maybe a cabin in the snow. But on the American frontier, a big fire could get you killed. Too much smoke, too much light, too much fuel burned too fast. Men like Simon Kenton, the Iron Man of the frontier, survived nights well below zero with no shelter, no tent, and no visible fire. The method they used was so quiet, so efficient, and so little known today that it has almost disappeared from modern survival knowledge. Tonight, I'm going to reveal the underground heat trick that kept frontiersmen alive and why it still works in survival situations today. Before we dive in, if you enjoy real historical survival techniques and want more insights into how the toughest men of the 18th century endured life in the wild, go ahead and like this video, share it with anyone who appreciates history or survival skills, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to Warfront Survival for more content like this. Alright, now let's get into the skill that kept people alive when the cold was relentless and resources were minimal. Simon Kenton was a man forged by the wilderness. Operating in what is now Ohio and Kentucky, he hunted, scouted and survived for weeks at a time in sub-zero conditions. Unlike settlers, he couldn't rely on cabins, fireplaces, or even a consistent supply of firewood. He had to remain hidden, mobile, and warm enough to survive the night. The technique he and other frontiersmen used was likely learned from indigenous nations like the Shawnee and Wabash, then honed over years of brutal trial and error. The key insight is this: the real danger wasn't simply the cold air. Cold alone doesn't kill. Exposure does. Moisture, wind and constant heat lost to the frozen ground strip the body of life-saving warmth. A big bonfire can solve one problem, heat, but it introduces 3 others. Smoke reveals your location for miles, flames consume fuel too quickly, and bright light destroys any hope of remaining concealed in the night. For someone like Kenton, staying alive meant creating long-lasting, invisible heat. So, here's how the method worked. First, a shallow pit about the size and depth of a human head was dug in the frozen ground. The bottom of this pit was lined with dry white oak bark, which was chosen specifically because it burns hot, smoulders rather than flares, and produces almost no smoke at all. Then a small fire was started in the pit, allowed to burn down into glowing coals, and after that more bark was layered over the coals in a crisscross pattern. This setup allowed a gentle flow of air without creating a visible flame. Finally, the pit was lightly covered with soil, leaving just 2 tiny air channels about the diameter of a finger. What this created was not a fire in the traditional sense, but rather a subsurface heater. There were no flames, hardly any smoke, and a slow, steady heat radiating from the ground. A single loading of bark could smoulder for, 12 to 18 hours, which was enough to last through the dead of night. Kenton would sit right over the pit with his legs folded, draping a heavy wool blanket over his shoulders and head, letting it fall all the way to the ground. The rising heat from the pit would warm the air within this blanket bubble. The soil blocked the wind, and the blanket trapped that warmth right around the body. The result was, honestly, astonishing. Temperatures could drop to deadly lows, snow might fall on the blanket's exterior, and the frontiersman would still remain warm enough to sleep, sitting upright, with no fire visible to any nearby observer. The pit could be quite small, leave almost no trace, and required far less fuel than a conventional fire. This technique was more than just survival. It was masterful thermal engineering, crafted long before modern survival science ever existed. You know, this method works not only historically, but today as well. Modern survival gear, like fuel canisters, batteries, and even synthetic blankets, can, well, fail when you least expect it. Sometimes a fire just isn't possible, maybe because of strong winds or a lack of fuel, and, honestly, smoke can put you at risk. The underground heat pit takes advantage of physics soil insulation and controlled airflow, and it does all this with nothing more than natural materials and a bit of careful attention. Once you get the hang of it, this technique lets a survivor stay warm, hidden, and really barely exposed, even in the harshest winter conditions. Understanding and applying this method also gives us a fresh perspective on life at the frontier. Survival back then wasn't about flashy tools or expensive gear. It was about working with nature, not fighting against it. The folks who managed to endure the longest didn't count on luck. They figured out how to control heat, conserve their resources, and move unseen through a hostile environment. These are lessons we can still use today, especially when we face modern survival challenges. So, the next time you're up against a cold night in the wilderness, or if you just want to admire the cleverness of America's early frontiersmen, remember the underground heat trick. A shallow pit, the right kind of bark, careful airflow, and a simple wool blanket can accomplish what piles of gear just can't, keeping you alive quietly and efficiently. Simon Kenton survived where others didn't, not because of firepower or wealth, but because he understood how to draw warmth from the earth itself. If you found this guide valuable, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends who love history or survival skills. And hey, comment below with your thoughts or any experiences you've had with historical survival techniques. And don't forget to subscribe to Warfront Survival so you never miss a lesson from the past that could save your life today.